Welcome, Apostates, to another episode of Apostasy Now, the podcast. This week we've got an amazing guest, very intelligent, well thought out, and I know you'll understand it because he does not speak without thinking first, Anton Hill, aka the Atheist Asshole. You'll enjoy the conversation, I guarantee it. This week I learned from last week my really crappy drama, which was apparently incoherent. I put my own thing at the end this time, and it's not a drama, it's kind of a commentary, it's interesting. It's got a MD talking, and you can stay tuned if you want. And if you don't, that's fine. The main part of the conversation will have some funny clips in it. Some of the things, though, will be Anton's vlogs. He's got excellent ones, and I wanted to give some of the data, some of the information that he offers up, and let you know a little bit about his style. And if you're curious about where that begins and ends, there will be a sound something like, or maybe a little like, that should indicate for you, and I'm sure you'll have no problem because you're very intelligent folks. So with that, let's get on with episode 4 of Apostasy Now.
Stand me up today, and tomorrow I'll drive you to school in my robe and pajamas and walk you to your first class.
Because I'm very much a skeptic. I'm more of a skeptic than I am an atheist. I mean, atheist is a conclusion based on my skepticism.
You'll have to come like a little child to the foot of the cross.
That attitude is what is responsible for the rise of atheism.
That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace.
What is the penalty for leaving the Muslim faith?
With the death penalty.
Thank you.
This is Apostasy Now.
For people to get the information correct before they start yapping.
Get ready to root for the bad guys.
Begins with E, evidence. All the evidence.
Where I have a ton of games that are kind of partially finished, like I was playing Assassin's Creed 3 because she got it for my birthday like last year, and then I got to a place where I just got so stuck, and I looked it up, and I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, just not enough time, and I was like, fuck you, Ubisoft. So I put that away, and I went to Oblivion, which, you know, is very highly rated, and I kept going on these stupid fetch quests, and they just kept saying, like, oh, you can't talk to this guy, talk to this. And I was like, you know what, how about this, Oblivion? Fuck you. So then I was like, well, what haven't I played in a while? So, yeah, I'm a huge Nintendo fan, but obviously I do like other stuff. My favorite trilogy so far is the Prince of Persia ones from like 2003.
Yeah.
I've played those like 3 times over, and then I happened to see on PlayStation Network that they have HD versions. I was like, oh, I gotta have those. So, yeah, you know, I guess there are ones that I work on for a while, and then I tend to get distracted. Still haven't finished Okami, you know.
Well, you don't really love a game until it keeps you up too late.
Yeah, no, I mean it's totally true. I've had that experience before. I'm like, okay, just one more level, and then before I know it, the sun's rising. I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, I had that experience when I first got Skyrim. Then I realized that it wasn't programmed correctly for the PS3, and that I was eventually going to bottom out on memory. But you know, before that happened, it was pretty entertaining.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a danger. I haven't played that one yet because I've told myself like I have to at least play Oblivion for a while before I move on to Skyrim.
Well, the problem with Skyrim was the way they programmed the memory for the PS3. There was just some sort of a memory fault that every time you save your game, any object you move or any glowing texture adds to the size of the save file. So you start off with a pretty modest, like 2,500 kilobyte save file, and by the time you've got 100 hours into it, it's like 16 megabytes, and your entire world is just laggy as all get out.
Oh, wow, I had no idea. God, that sucks because we've got a PS3, and I'm not planning to get a 360 anytime soon, so shit.
Yeah.
Well, I'll keep that in mind.
So, you know, since we've never talked before, it's your first time obviously on our show, it's pretty new. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background about how you kind of came to your current state online, like what you stand for?
Oh man, current state online. Okay, let me see if I can give a brief and interesting version. Okay, well, I'll I won't give you my whole deconversion, but the first point is that I deconverted at 19, and so it was quite a while ago now. It's not like it was last year. I then got involved with local LA groups, pretty involved actually. At some point, I was on the board of one, and it was sort of an extensive hobby. And then at some point, I wrote about this on my site recently. I kind of realized I was getting the American Atheist newsletter, and I realized that I was getting pissed off every month on the same day.
I saw that on your blog. You were writing about that not too long ago.
Yeah, and it was nothing against the community. I really wanted to support it, but I really, really didn't like just feeling angry for 2 or 3 days straight about stuff that I really couldn't do anything about it. So at some point, I think I just someone. Oh, you know what it was? When I was on the board of this organization, someone was asking me at the time, like, you get up voluntarily on one Sunday a month at like 9 a.m. You don't enjoy it. You're not paid for it. Why are you doing this? And I was like, I don't know. So I ended up moving out of the LA area, and I subsequently, sort of stopped being on the board. And I stopped. It actually was a bit of a dramatic falling out with me in that organization, and so I was like, you know what, you guys can go to hell, and they're like, yeah, you can too. So then flash forward quite a number of years, and I just wasn't really involved with community at all. And again, not because there's anything wrong with it. I just, I got to other stuff, and then I think what happened was, I don't know if you guys remember this because it was kind of big news at the time, even though it wasn't significant. But a couple of years ago in like 2009, I think it was the Miss America pageant happened, and one of the finalists, when she was asked like, do you support gay marriage, she basically said that she felt it was not biblically correct.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but that really pissed me off. And I think it was because I've done some Bible scholarship, like very, very amateurly. I've read parts, and I've studied bits, and I've listened to the apologetic arguments, so I know a little bit about it. And my understanding is that is part of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and I've heard many, many Christians tell me that with Jesus coming, that threw out everything. Like he fulfilled the law, therefore that part of the law was no longer necessary.
Right. Yeah.
I've also heard from other Christians that that's absolute horseshit, and that he also said not one iota of the law will be thrown out until all is fulfilled. So I honestly don't know who the hell is right. I don't think they know either. But the point being that hearing someone say this, it was like, would you please just read your own damn book? Besides the fact, I think when you really get down to it, saying that homosexuality is wrong is not the same thing as saying that homosexual marriage is wrong, in my opinion, because you're saying that a person's personality or behavior, whatever you want to define it as, is wrong. But that's one thing. Like, a marriage contract is not inherently bound to sexuality. I mean, in my opinion, I don't like legally the law is a concept, so the law doesn't have any emotions, and the law as a concept doesn't care about the gender. It's just that we happen to have culturally decided that it does. So in my opinion, there's nothing inherently linking marriage with being gay, just as there's nothing linking marriage with love. Like, people don't actually have to be in love to be married. We just sort of assume that they are. So when she was saying this, I was like, yeah, but it doesn't actually say gays can't get married. It says gays can't be gay and we can kill them, but it does, and it's not quite the same thing. So it's
actually worse.
Yeah, so I started writing about it, and at the time I picked the name because for basically two reasons. One is they're going to call you one anyway, so you might as well just, know. But then the other one was I was kind of sick of being polite. I felt like a lot of what was going on, just sort of in my observation, was that I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but I feel like probably around the early 1980s in America, there started to be this weird cultural thing going where suddenly all opinions are valid because it became socially unacceptable to question or ridicule anything.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a very liberal household, and I still consider myself very liberal. However, I've seen the flaws of this system, because when you get to a point in a society where you declare that no one can ever be offended, suddenly certain things go away, like comedy and criticism and satire and because if everybody feels that they have the right not to be offended, then you suddenly are constantly walking on eggshells. And so I think what happened was you couldn't say anything about anything anymore, and I was kind of tired of that. And so what I was tired of was I don't know about Canada, but here
You're in California, right?
yeah. Well, actually, here's a good example. I don't know if you guys know about Proposition 8 that recently got overturned.
Yeah.
But that was voted in 2008, and I wasn't living in California at the time, so I actually didn't know about it until it happened. And it really angered me that a religion, an organization, could basically privately fund the passing of this bill. And I get democracy, like people vote, but I thought, there's also the legal principle here where the majority does not have the right to vote to crush the minority. And so it really bothered me that was even possible. But I remember around the time, like, I would hear a lot of talk of opinion and viewpoint and worldview. And it was like, well, right, but there are some worldviews that simply aren't correct. For example, my worldview that if I jump off of a tall building, I will survive is not correct. And it doesn't deserve respect because it simply isn't true. So I think what I got sick of was I felt like, I and other people were constantly expected to be polite. And so I was like, you know what, I think it's time to be an asshole, because to some degree, I think the only way to move these things forward is to say, you know what, I respect your right to have that opinion, but this is why it's complete horseshit. And this is why it deserves to be called complete horseshit rather than a different viewpoint. So I think that was a very long answer. I'm sorry, but but yeah. So since then, I've gotten more active, and it's kind of ebbed and flowed. Like I've actually calmed down my tone quite a bit because I've actually the reason that I cited before, which was I was tired of being angry, and then I also I've realized that using ad hominems pretty much ever doesn't really work very well, because once you start establishing that in a conversation, then the conversation itself completely deteriorates, and then nothing constructive can happen. And so, interestingly, I got a comment from someone just a couple of days ago saying, I don't know how you can keep calm with these people. And I wanted to say, well, you sort of have to, because even though I don't respect their belief, I want to have a conversation. And in order for that to occur, I can't just say, oh, you're just being a prick, because then then they're like, well, fuck you. And then, yeah, so.
We don't got no goddamn band, you motherfuckers. Y'all just a bunch of losers. Just get the fuck out of my house now.
Not your house, Doyle. It's Linda's.
I will fucking kill you if you talk to me again.
So the tone has changed, and posting kind of increased and decreased. And at some point, you guys found the vlog. And the only reason I'm even doing that was I was not getting around to anything. My inbox was backed up for like months, and it takes forever to make even a basic video, because you got to edit it, or at least I think that's necessary. And so I thought, you know what, why don't I just do this just once a week?
Well,
just talk.
You are one of the things that I like about yours is that you are very articulate.
Oh, thanks.
You're thought out about what you're saying, instead of just kind of like a lot of people getting, like you say, really emotional and nasty or hyperactive, maybe, if you will.
Yeah, no, I have tried to do that, although honestly, God, a couple of my watch, I'm like, what the fuck was that? But one of my mandates to myself was minimal editing. Like, the only reason I would edit is if, like, a car goes by and you just can't fucking hear anything. Or I recorded one that I haven't posted yet where I have a page sitting off camera that I'm trying to keep track of, and the wind blows and it just takes off, because, hey, that's how physics works. And I was like, fuck! And so on camera, you see like the ground racing quickly, and that has nothing to do with anything. So I'm just going to cut that out. But what I've tried to do is stay honest and stay clear and stay on point. And actually, I had a 16-minute one where I didn't realize it's 16 minutes, and I went back and I watched it, and I was like, fuck, I'm going on forever. But I was like, well, I don't feel like I should cut any of this, because I'm being honest, and I don't know. I was like, fuck.
Some things, some days, it merits 16 minutes. Track. That's
well, I know that there's sort of an unspoken standard on YouTube and other forums or fora, if you will, of 5 to 10 minutes max. And actually, I don't know if you guys are aware, but I made a little video about 6 months ago or something that was almost 20 minutes, and one of the reasons that people were angry at me was that it was 20 minutes.
Oh yeah.
That's being a bit nitpicky.
Well, the people who were angry, I think, were looking for reasons to be angry, even though I can't prove that.
Just tell them assholes in the name. Move on.
Well, what's funny is I kind of have sometimes, and God, I love this when this happens. Sometimes people will tell me, "Well, you're really proving the asshole," but it's like, wow, did you come up with that on your own? Did you take an improv class to get that? That's amazing. Shit, man, you have your own show. That's awesome. It's kind of like,
sorry,
I don't know if you guys are aware, but I'm visually impaired, and so as a consequence, when I was a kid, it was common knowledge that I didn't see very well, and I was nearsighted. And so a common gag that other kids would do, which I actually don't consider bullying, so let's not go there. But sometimes kids would flip me off, and they would say, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And I was like, do you really think you're the first person to think of that?
Yeah.
They'd always be laughing. Everybody's like, "How many fingers?" And it's like, I know what you're doing, and yes, it's very, 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 very funny, and yes, good job, like congratulations.
Yeah.
And so I kind of feel it's the same thing. It's like, it would just, how about just do this? Search in the comments for asshole, and you'll see that other people have done this too. So, but yeah, no, I mean, a couple people on a certain website have definitely like use that to their advantage, and they're like, well, he calls himself that, so maybe, and it's like, okay, good job.
Well, I've noticed that some people, particularly on things like Twitter and YouTube, they have their people that they hate, and they love to hate them. So once you probably attract some, like I don't have any yet, but I'm sure
I've really been fascinated by that, and I'm gonna say it. I vlogged about it recently because I had this experience that was kind of indicative of that on Twitter a few weeks ago, I think, where I was going on about how I don't know if you guys know about the block bot or how you feel about it, but I think it's just dumb and a waste of time, and I'm kind of impressed by how much time the creators and perpetrators of that have put into it, because it seems like it's more than more than a few hours. And and as I've explored it just sort of casually, I've been like, this looks like it takes effort. Like this is a serious hobby. My only point was that I don't think that that the way that conversations occur on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever would actually occur in real life. And I think there's a reason for that, because we all have to be polite to each other most of the time. And, that's how social discourse works, because otherwise we'd fight and kill each other all the time over really petty shit. And I'm really fascinated that it doesn't seem to be that way at all on Twitter. And I mean, I think I know why. Of course, there's a bit of a shield of anonymity, or at least just distance. But it just blows my mind how vicious people are willing, like happy to be to each other for usually no good reason. And I've been a bit guilty of that myself, so I'm not I'm not an exception. But yeah, it's like, wow, how did this even happen? Like, why are we so willing to slit each other's throats over pretty much nothing when we never would do this to each other in person, ever? So I don't know.
It's an ongoing area of study. I know Reap has found that fascinating. He talks about it being, what does he say? Stanford experiment?
Yeah, and I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, so I had to look that up, and I was like, oh, wow, that is... But my wife and I saw this documentary about... It was about wealth disparity in America, and they used at some point the model of monopoly, and they said what's very interesting is they did a study where they just gave one monopoly player a ton of money to start with, and they gave another player minimal money to start with, and then they just had them play the game. And what they found every single time was that the person who had more money happily and viciously just trounced the other person and felt extremely what was the word? They basically felt entitled.
Yeah.
And they found that in the real world, this tends to be true as well, is people who have money tend to believe that they have it because they deserve it, and the more they get, the more they feel that way. And so what ends up happening, of course, is you get this class of people who not only think that they deserve it, but like basically think fuck you if you don't have it, and then they're willing to do terrible things to people because they can. And
this is the area that Smashlock is going to be learning a lot about human nature.
Oh yeah. So sociology and psychology right now.
Oh, excellent! I've been dying to talk to a sociologist about this stuff, because I'm just not qualified to really explore it beyond.
I'm just a student in a foundational course to go on to possibly do some social service work and hopefully get a bachelor's of psychology in a few years if my grades pan out. But
right.
I'm at the first tentative steps.
Then you'll have to tell me after a couple of years, like, what the fuck is going on.
I will keep that in mind. Actually, you might get a kick out of this. The reason why I went with the name Smashlock, because that's a couple people ask me, like, is that like a Matlock? Like you're trying to go like a Matlock play on words? I used to argue on Debate Faith on Stickan.
Oh wow!
And that was a couple of years ago, and I went on the name Ashlock. And apparently that's really, really close to the German word for asshole, so I changed it.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, I barely speak any German, so...
I don't speak any, but I was like, all right, well, let's go with Smashlock. I'm smashing your arguments anyway, so...
Yeah. No, you're braver than I have gone through that forum phase, as I sometimes call it, and I just stopped at some point. I was like, Anton, you're not going to convince him of anything. And in fact, one rule that I made for myself was the only way I would get into any debate would be if someone came to me. And that worked for a while, and then people started coming to me. It was like, oh, shit, okay. Well, that's the rule, so here we go.
I actually found it an enlightening experience when I did it, because it kind of really was the first experience I had with being involved in the argument instead of just watching it play out in text or on YouTube. And I'll admit, back then I was a little bit more immature about it, so I had a little bit of fun trolling the occasional creationist or whatnot. Like I even convinced one kid, he was because I was trying to prove this idea that they are inherently gullible. So I went on, and he says, oh, well, they haven't proved the theory of everything, so therefore God. And I'm like, oh, really? You've never heard of the atmosphere theory? And he's like, well, what's that? And I'm like, oh, well, you take a particle and you invert it spatially in on itself. It's called quantum atomic inversion. And I went on this hour-and-a-half spiel of utter bullshit that I was making up off the fly. But apparently there was a physicist student, like a physics student in the room listening, and he's laughing. Because he says, this sounds really convincing, and I take physics at a university level. Where did you learn physics? And I'm like, I didn't. I fucking dropped it. So like this kid by the end of it's like, wow, atmosphere theory, I'm gonna go look that up, and then he leaves and everyone's like, really, did you just convince this kid of utter crap? And I'm like, yeah, this is what I mean, they're gullible.
No, I've seen that all the time on I don't know if you guys have seen my near death experiences equal bullshit video, but that was actually a sort of a one-off thing that I really didn't expect anybody to give a fuck about. And it's taken a couple of years, but it's at 1,300 views, which is, I'm simply not that popular on YouTube. I mean, it's just a fact. I have like maximum, I think 2,200 on the highest one, but it's just amazing looking at the comments. It's like, people just don't know the basics. And to be fair, when I was younger, I didn't know them either. I had to learn them in order to talk to people. But, people all the time are like, well, what, do you think she's lying about her experience? Like, no, I didn't say she's lying. I'm saying I don't think that it's necessarily what she said it was. Like, that's a different thing. Lying implies intent. It's a very specific behavior. And, I have seen and experienced things that I thought were one thing, and then I realized later they weren't. It didn't mean that I was lying to myself. It meant I was wrong. Like, it's not that complicated. Or I just answered this guy's comment about burden of proof. I swear I've had the same conversation with him at least 5 times where he just keeps saying, well, you're making a claim. And I'm like, yeah, my claim is a negative claim. That means it cannot be proved. You can't disprove Satan. It's impossible. Like, any excuse you come up with will be able to be rationalized. Like, oh, I didn't see him anywhere. Okay, well, you didn't look in the right place. Or I don't even know what it would be. I said burden of proof is on the positive. It's always on the positive. But I had an argument with someone months ago about who was an atheist and who's actually behind the Blockbot, and he too was like, no, the burden of proof is on the more extraordinary claim. And I was like, no, that's bullshit. It's because that's a subjective determination. What's extraordinary for me is not extraordinary for you. Now, granted, I know what Sagan said. Like, I'm not illiterate to Sagan, but I think what he was going for at the time was, if you claim something really out there that no one has ever heard of, then yes, that absolutely requires evidence. But it's still a positive claim that you're making.
Yeah.
He never said if you claim that the universe doesn't even exist, then you must prove that. He wasn't going for that. I mean, of course, I'm putting words in his dead mouth, but
that's also a popular activity for some people.
Yeah,
I've that's, if you're quoting someone's solid work that has, there's a larger body surrounding it, I understand it. But when you take when you're in the middle of an argument and you think you're going to win the argument with a small one-off line from someone, that's not always the best route to go.
No, well, or I don't know if you guys have seen Kirk Cameron do this, where he's like, Darwin was a racist, and it's like, so that doesn't have any bearing on his theory. And actually, my wife was disappointed to hear that. And I was like, well, but let's step back a little bit too. He was living in an era where what we consider racism was everybody was that, and I don't think he was exactly what we would consider him to be. But let's just say that he was. Like, let's say that he was what we would call that, and it still has nothing to do with the theory. It's just unfortunate that a great theory came from a tarnished individual, But
when we look back, we often sterilize the past, right? There's certain things about it we don't want to remember.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think we all do that. I remember when I was a huge fan of Braveheart when it came out when I was in high school, and when I found out that Gibson was like this diehard Catholic, I was like, oh no. And then when I found out, of course, that he dropped the J-bomb about that woman in Malibu, I was like, oh God, no. But then by that point, I was like, okay, so clearly he's a dick. But then when I heard that he like left a message with his then girlfriend about how she should be gang raped, I was like, wow, you're just a colossal asshole.
Yeah.
But I still love your stupid movie.
Yeah. And that's it. You're able to see the difference. Sometimes it's a little difficult because his face is actually on it, whereas someone like, say, Shakespeare, if we found out he was a total, complete douchebag, but his face isn't on there, it's a little easier.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, actually. I guess that's a good point. I mean, I still struggle with it because I've challenged people with this. Like, I've said, do you enjoy Harry Potter? And like, oh yeah, it's great. And I was like, okay, do you enjoy, providing employment to convicted rapists? And like, no, of course not. I'm like, okay, well, did you pay to see Harry Potter? And they're like, yeah, of course. I'm like, well, you paid a convicted rapist. And like, well, how the hell does that work? And I'm like, because Harry Potter was made by the studio that paid, oh God, what the fuck was that guy's name? The boxer. Mike Tyson paid Mike Tyson a lot of money to be in Hangover, and they don't give a shit. Clearly, like, they don't give a fuck that he was a convicted rapist. And I would challenge all of the so-called feminists out there, like, you should not ever watch a Warner Brothers movie ever, because you are giving money to a system which gave money to a convicted rapist.
Yeah.
And if you're not okay with that, then you should never, ever, ever watch any of their films or their TV shows or go to their theme parks or anything, because you are facilitating, you're condoning their action.
But it's a lot easier to do that. What you're talking about is putting the standard that some people demand of others and then turning it around and going, well, if you're going to have that high standard of perfection and absolute zero tolerance, then these are the things that we're going to start talking about that you have to give up, that you're not considering.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I realized a long time ago, and this is myself included, that people hold to their ethics right up until the point where it's kind of inconvenient.
Yeah.
And then they tend to fly out the window, and then people just don't give a shit anymore. And that's why I've gone into arguments on Twitter with even atheists, usually atheists, about these set moral standards, because it's like, well, okay, I don't know if you guys are aware, but David Silverman was quoted in the A News podcast saying rape jokes aren't funny, or no, I think he said rape jokes are never funny. And so I posted a thing on Twitter quoting him saying, well, I guess Monty Python never got the memo. And then he was like, well, they're comedians. It's like, that's not what you said, though. You said they're not funny.
Right.
Like, that's an unqualified statement.
Yeah,
and that's fine. Like, you can believe that, but here you go. Like, here's an example where millions upon millions of people seem to think it's okay, including women.
Yeah.
And the joke, as you guys might recall, was, you were raped? Well, at first, yes. And so it's making light of it. I mean, as far as I can tell, according to the current atmosphere, that's absolutely unacceptable. It's making fun of the victim.
Well, even PZ on that video, that was several months ago, But he was
I made one in response to that. Yeah.
He makes a very offhand, very quick, you have to see as a rape joke. And this is the thing that they can't get to their head, is that, jokes can be meant in a malicious way, or they can be meant in a way that's not malicious at all.
Well, and that's actually what I think Silverman conceded was I said what you should have said was rape jokes are never funny when used as an attack.
Yeah.
Because I think that probably we could all kind of agree on. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of absolute morality I get sick of with anybody, because it's like, well, killing people is bad right up until the point where we're in a war, or when it's self-defense, or it's like, it's bad until it's not. or supporting convicted rapists is a really terrible thing to do unless you want to watch a movie with one of them in it. Then
and she says, no, it has to feel real and dangerous. I'm like, what, are you out of your fucking mind? You think I'm just gonna rape you on the off chance that hopefully you're into that shit? I'm an idiot. I'm getting kind of a rapey vibe from this girl. I don't know. I suspect she might enjoy being raped. Maybe that's her thing. I don't want to ask first and ruin it, so just take a shot and rape her. What the hell? What's the worst that could happen after all?
Suddenly it's okay. And I think most people just in their day-to-day lives don't have this struggle. I think it's when your blog or your site is dependent upon strong opinions and support of those strong opinions that you are unwilling to back down from, that you kind of get stuck in these problems, because it's like, well, and I got a commenter on my response video to BZ Myers, who was like, well, he wasn't condoning it. I was like, no. He didn't say anything about condoning. He said the jokes aren't funny. That's it. And he made one. It was like, well, he's spoken out. It's like, I understand he's spoken out about them. He still made this joke.
Yeah. Do you think that the reason why Silverman or PC Myers, but Silverman, because you were mentioning him earlier about how he said that they are never funny, I find him to be more of a politician than an activist anymore.
Right. Well, I mean, I can't really speak to Myers because I honestly don't pay that much attention to him. And although I heard recently that he wrote about me and was pissed off, and I was like, all right, well,
he's pissed off at everyone.
Yeah,
wait a second.
Like, wow,
You're saying PZ Myers wrote about someone and was pissed off at them? I don't know if I can believe that.
Well, and it was granted, I have since realized there was some decent reason for it, and I issued somewhat of an apology, not to him, but just for a little bit of what I said. But I was a little kind of shocked by it, because like, wow, this is what you guys are pissed off at? I mean, granted, it was a silly thing I did, but I don't think it was. But hey, okay, maybe it was more offensive than I thought, and if that's the case, then hey, that's on me. But no, Silverman, I have always felt that his job is to be more of a politician, and I don't think he should be considered an activist. And in fact, when I've heard people disparage him for various reasons, I'm like, well, I mean, he's in a position where he has certain responsibilities, and some of those are possibly politically malleable. I don't think he can be held to some standards that we might be able to hold other people to. But I don't know. I mean, maybe that shouldn't be that way. I'm not really sure. I just know that it's primarily an advocacy organization rather than, say, an activism organization. But maybe they would disagree with me. That's just the impression I've gotten over the years.
Well, I mean, with most politicians, at least in my personal view, I'm not a political science major or anything like that. It seems like they'll go and they'll ebb and sway with the popular opinion within their particular block, the people that they represent. And it just seems like Silverman, from everything that I've viewed, seems to be going with this atheism plus movement. He kind of goes with the one that has the loudest voice. And that's where I kind of I feel disheartened as an atheist. I know I'm not a member of the American, the United States of America, but it saddens me that he is kind of going with this popularity contest instead of truly advocating for secular rights.
Yeah, I mean, I am too disappointed, but I'm actually not as disappointed as I thought I would be. Because I think there's a couple of threads going on here. One is he has admitted publicly that Myers is a friend of his, and that's fine. Like, I have no problem with that. I can understand how it might look to Silverman. I heard him on Vakula's show, and I've said publicly, like, it's not like Justin's my best friend. I mean, we barely know each other. And if, as I've said publicly, some things that he is accused of having done, he has done, then that's bad, and he should suffer the consequences of those actions. I have chosen to be largely ignorant of any of that because I just don't want to spend time on it. So I don't know. I've heard from one party that he is innocent. I've heard another party that he's guilty. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't care, so I'm not going to decide on this. But I can kind of understand why I'm not advocating it, of course, or endorsing it, but I can understand why Silverman was irritated. I think he was rude on Justin's show. I think he was inappropriate. And I think the whole speech about being in the shit was inappropriate. But I have to say that if I were the leader of a national organization whose job it was to promote atheism and just be an advocate for us, and some friend of mine told me that some punk was telling people they were too ugly to rape, I'd be like, wait, is he an atheist? What the fuck is going on? And I would probably lean towards my friend without investigating, which is not responsible, but is human and understandable. Now, that having been said, I don't support what Silverman has said in some ways publicly. I think I was really disappointed by the 2014 speaker list. I'm really fucking sick of hearing about Greta Castina and Sikivu Hutchinson. That the latter woman really pisses me off, and I don't think they should be endorsed. But at the same time, it's a membership organization, and all it takes is members not going or not paying. And I mean, it's like every time I hear people complain about Hollywood and the movies that they release, and I say, well, if you don't like them, don't watch them, because Hollywood is a business. It exists for one reason, to make money. It has no other concern. So if suddenly a bunch of pro-girl, like Women Are Strong and Independent of Men movies became extremely popular, that's all that they would make. They would throw out the torture porn in a heartbeat. They don't give a fuck. What they care about is making money.
Yeah.
And the only reason there were 7 Saw movies is because people watched them. That's it. It's not like anybody had an agenda. I mean, they did. They had an agenda to make money.
Yeah.
So I say the same thing to American Atheists. Like, if you want to grow the movement, this is the thing. I think Silverman's biggest mistake, if I can speak for him, is that he said something. I think he should have just stayed out of it entirely. And he admitted to me on Twitter that he had stayed out of the Shermer thing and some other thing. And I think that was smart, because he shouldn't be getting involved in it because it's pretty petty. And I think he should have stayed out of this stuff as well, because then he can maintain, for lack of a better term, moral high ground. And I think what's going to happen is he's going to quietly say less and less, and then it'll seem as if he's not a part of it, and then it'll just move on. I mean, I honestly think all that stuff's going to die out, because I know enough people who are atheists who are not involved in the movement because of things like that.
Yeah.
That the movement will not survive if those things don't at least calm down, if not go away. And it's going to happen eventually. The loudest, as you guys said, will say what they need to say, and they will keep saying it, and they'll get more intense, and they will get smaller and smaller and more intense. And, honestly, I don't even pay attention to some people anymore. I told myself the other day, like, I think I posted about this recently, actually. I said, some people have said some things about me recently that were actually completely factually inaccurate. And at first I was like, I'm going to make a post and I'm going to put up the screen caps, and I'm going to, and then actually my wife was like, why? And I was like, because they got it wrong. And she's like, so? And I was like, okay. Yeah, that's because and even last night I was playing Metroid The Other M, and I was like, wow, this is really fun. I really like doing this much more than seeing what Free Flop Blogs is saying about me. Like,
yeah,
this
it's
is
more
more
entertaining
fun.
to have a life than to be scouring the internet for crap about you.
Well, and in fact, there was this bunch of comments on the A-News site about the convention where this guy, A Hermit, I don't really know who he is, except he commented on one of my videos a long time ago, and he was like, fuck you, and I was like, all right, well, whatever. He posted a thing which I was kind of disturbed by, and I've chosen to remain largely ignorant of, because I just don't want to spend the time on it, but he said that Reap had said something about Svan, and he posted the link. And I went to the link, and it's my fucking best friend and biggest fan, who I won't name because fuck her. But she's got this post about him, and then and that's fine. Like, I have no objection to that. But then the comments, I was just like, God, do you people have no life at all? Seriously, like it's the same people over and over and over again. They're like, yeah, he's a dick. Yeah, I agree. Wow, what a troll. And it's like, this is your life, isn't it? Like, this is what you do for fun. Is you wait for a new post by this person, and then you go on there and either agree with her or scream about the opposition, whoever that might be. And I did that when I was like 22, and I got really into it. And the thing about that period of my life that is different now is that at that point, I wasn't married. I didn't have much that I was doing. And I think I kind of got off on the adrenaline rush, which is, natural and human. And I've been guilty of that since. But it's like what my wife said, like, why? And I was like, ooh. And I even thought to myself, like, okay, let's just say that the things that were said about me are not corrected. They're not redacted. There is no apology posted. What does that mean for my life? And I was like, I guess I don't care. Like, it just doesn't, like, I'm still going to enjoy Halloween. I'm still going to celebrate my birthday. We're still going to go off to, Greece next year. Like, and I thought, okay, I got to stop. This is bullshit. So that's why I decided for myself, like, okay, don't name people anymore. Don't pick any fights. Don't respond to any pick fights. Just anything that you think is not going to be fun, don't do it, because it's not going to be fun.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest earlier in the conversation. I forget what we were talking about, but my view on it is that everyone has different things that they're going to naturally, feel good at the end of the day, that they put their time into it. I know, for instance, someone I'm a little bit more, I have a good sense of humor. But if someone wants to throw down with me online, I'm always down for it.
Right.
That's just my personality type. A good counterexample would be someone that I listen to a lot is Lee Moore. Lee Moore is constantly a peacemaker, and I don't think anything negative of it. I think he's great at what he does. Just very different personality from say, myself. So, and it takes all types to make a good community.
No, I mean, I've actually really admired Lee over the past couple of years, how he has maintained calm. And in fact, my big hoopla that happened in January over the video I posted about this person, she and I and he were kind of getting into a place of resolution. He less so, of course, because he had nothing to do with it. But then I wrote this brief piece where I was making fun of myself mostly, where I was basically saying, like, okay, she's a sanctimonious blowhard, I'm a sanctimonious blowhard. Like, let's just put down the axes and call it good. And he wrote to me and he basically said, I'm not going to publish this. It's not going to make anything better. And at first I was like, fuck you, Lee, fucking fuck you. But then I wrote back and I said, you're right. I agree with you. And I think I just needed to get it out. But now that I've done that, I haven't published on my side either. Like, it's just like, you know what? It was raw emotion, and it was what I needed to get it off my chest. And I'm really glad that he did that, because I think it would not have helped. And I'm actually really glad that he didn't make a big spectacle out of it. He wrote to me privately, said, I will not publish this. This is why. And he even conceded, like, I agree with you on these points. But, basically we have peace to maintain. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And I'm glad you said that.
It's a true sign of a good mediator, somebody who can recognize when something is only going to make a situation more...
That's a good term for him, mediator.
Mediator.
Well, at the same time, though, I don't blame this on him, but I think his efforts have largely been in vain. And I think that's too bad, because I think he really, truly wanted to try to make a difference. But I think that, I remember seeing a Myers post around the time that Lee was doing most of what he was doing. And basically Myers said, they're all assholes. We've done nothing wrong. Fuck them. And I thought, okay, he's certainly, he's certainly entitled to his opinion. Absolutely. And he's certainly entitled to believe that he is completely right. I have no objection to that. But what that tells me is what I need to know. And what I need to know is that Myers sees none of his actions as inappropriate. And again, I don't really even know his work. I've barely read him. But I remember a long time ago seeing I'm kind of a fan of The Amazing Atheist. Sometimes I find him really loud and obnoxious. But sometimes I find...
Love-hate.
Yeah, it's kind of. But sometimes I really like what he says. And I happened to notice, I don't know where I saw it, but I happened to notice that he and Myers mixed it up a bit, and Myers called him something like a rampant sociopath. And I checked out what TJ said, and I thought, okay, I can see where Myers would find this objectionable, but Sociopath. That's a very specific term that I don't think Myers is qualified to diagnose. I mean, I understand he meant it largely conversationally, but I don't know. It kind of made me feel icky. It was like, well, I don't tend to call people that unless they do something that I really feel is like beyond the pale. Like calling someone a rapist publicly.
Yeah, I was gonna say he got off light this time. It could have been rapist.
Yeah. So when I saw stuff like that, I was like, okay, well, clearly he feels that this is appropriate behavior, and he is seeing this as black and white, and he is seeing other people as just assholes. Like his comment, I think his comment was specifically on the slime pit. And again, I've said publicly, I don't give a fuck about the slime pit. I'm not a member. I've only checked it out twice through links, and I just don't care. I don't want to get involved. I whether it's objectionable, whether it's not, I just don't give a fuck. So, and I've told people that who have accused me of being a slime pitter. I'm like, well, I'm not. So you're wrong. But I think he said like, oh, all slime pitters are misogynists, and I thought, well, that's just simply inaccurate. Like I know at least two of them, and they're not. So if he's interested in fact, then he should retract that and say, you know what I should have said was some of them are, or some of them might be. Because that's a factual statement. Some of them might be. But yeah, when you see that stuff, you're like, okay, well, this is the person I'm dealing with, and this is how they are dealing with stuff. And so this is just what I need to know. And once I knew that, I was like, okay, well, no more attention.
I share this curiosity about human behavior that you often talk about, sociology, psychology. With Myers, as much as I get pissed at some of the things he does and says, there's a part of me that wonders if he doesn't have some kind of something lacking on a social level. He seems to honestly sometimes not understand that what he's doing really is out of line. He seems to think that it's perfectly normal.
Included in this delicious list of social justice-ness antis is, of course, being anti-rape culture, whatever the hell that means, and anti-rape jokes. You can imagine my great surprise when I actually witnessed P.Z. Myers cracking a rape joke.
After a rape, you want to wash yourself up and clean up.
I know Myers' statement was a rape joke because it was about rape, and it was a joke. How do I know it was a joke? Well, because there's a setup and a punchline, and even he laughed at it.
Yeah, we should.
And then a couple of other people laughed at it.
We should have...
Yeah, I suspect something like that, and I also suspect that because he exists in a bit of an echo chamber where he's pretty much being paid to spew whatever bullshit he feels like spewing, and then he's got, his list of, let's just say, 200 to 500 to 1,000 supporters who seemingly, no matter what he does say, will always have his back. I just don't see that situation as being different, because it's like, well, why would he has no incentive to change his behavior or even recognize that there's behavior to be changed, and since it all exists in this weird, internet world that we still as a species haven't quite wrapped our minds around. It's like it's going to be that way until it can't be that way anymore, I guess.
Well, I think PZ suffers from something that I have learned about in my psychology class, which is called just let me get the term right. It is false consensus bias, like the way to view the world or view a particular instance and overestimate the number of people that agree with you. He just seems to. I would suspect that professionally he is on the ball, he's good at his job, and he's generally rational. But when it comes to the social aspect of his existence, or blogging, or the atheist movement, I think he self-projects his own popularity and authority to mean much more than it actually does.
Yeah, that would make sense. That would explain a lot, because one of the things that I've tried to do in my activity is recognize that not everyone will agree with me, and to some extent, not everyone should agree with me. And I've had a couple times where people are like, well, why do you think this? Like, I don't think this. And I'm like, oh, shit, I totally assumed you would. And I probably shouldn't have done that because I had no reason to think that. But, yeah, I've known a few professors, and it's kind of like prison guards. There's a certain type that becomes a professor, and this isn't meant to sound too disparaging, but there tend to be certain traits. Like, you tend to like the sound of your own voice. You tend to think you're really smart, and you tend to be. So it just sort of is this self-confirming cycle.
Yeah.
You tend to talk about looking down in terms of class. Like you tend to not support class distinctions, but then you tend to engage in them, at least in terms of intellectual stuff. And I've seen this over and over again in people who are university level teachers, and you tend to live in a bubble where everyone agrees with you, and so you tend to be completely shocked when someone doesn't. All of these things tend to happen, and so when I hear you describe that, I think, yeah, that sounds like some people I've known. And you also tend to take things very personally, but then act like you're not. And so when someone disagrees with you, you just kind of shun them without saying anything to them.
Well, you have to keep up that veneer of being a rationally minded individual, especially in this movement.
Yeah.
Because if you get overly emotional about anything, then it tends to discredit you.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
a lot of ways.
Yeah. So you can't ever say, like, you really made me angry. Because then it's like, well, that's your fucking problem, dickhead. Like, deal with it.
Well, yeah, we're not Vulcans. We're humans. At the end of the day, we're only as rational as we can be up until the point that we become irrational. I mean, it's going to happen. I get irrational all the time. I'm a temperamental guy, but the difference between a person who is constantly emotional and can't see reason and a person who is just, able to see reason but will still be emotional, I think is just that ability to dial it back a bit. And then reevaluate your words and say, okay, I was wrong, or okay, you were wrong, but let's take another look at it.
Well, that's why I posted that thing recently, boy, did I fuck up, because I went in the conversation with this person expecting the person to agree with me. And then I got that, I not only agree, but say, like, wow, that's a really good point. Like, wow, what an interesting hypothesis. And this is all happening in my head. And then when the words, God, how did they put it? Like that statement reeks of white male. I was like, holy shit. But then, we remained calm and we talked about it. And I thought, fuck, the person's right. It does reek of that. And that's true. It does. And I need to admit that. And I need to concede what I said, because if I care about skeptical thinking, then I need to apply that to myself. And we had a long talk about it. And I said, well, this is kind of when and it finally came. And what I feel ashamed about was it finally came back to me. And like, well, how would you feel if this happened? And I was like, well, I wouldn't. I was like, oh, I see. Okay. So when I'm talking about someone else, it's easy to make this hypothesis. When I'm talking about myself, it's a little harder, which tells me that it's kind of bullshit. So,
you don't embrace hypocrisy. It's the easiest way to live. I assure you.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing of like what we support, that's been a struggle for me, because, like, for example, I've never read Ender's Game. I've never seen any film version of it. But I thought to myself, what if it were, better example, Gene Roddenberry. I found out a few years ago that he cheated on his wife like tons of times.
Oh, really?
And with Nichelle Nichols, and didn't leave her because I don't know why, but just didn't leave his wife. I don't know why, but banged Nichelle Nichols night and day or something. And things were so bad at some point that like Majel Barrett was going to leave him, and just crap. And I also learned from his son through his documentary that he made about his dad that they weren't really close for a long time, and they didn't really get close until shortly before Gene died. Now, I love Star Trek. I'm not the biggest Star Trek geek, but I'm pretty damn close. I don't have any collectibles except for a uniform that I had custom tailored in college.
Okay, well, that's good.
I've gone to one convention, but I watch the movies, I watch a TV series. I am an apologist. When people say, like, well, it's stupid that Kirk does this, I'm like, yes, you're right, it's stupid, but I like it anyway. And when I heard this, I was like, fuck. But then I was like, you know what he did in his marriage is none of my business, and it doesn't affect the material.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you wrote an episode specifically commenting on it, in which case it does. But
well, I've been told. Yeah, I don't think there's any episodes where the theme is about people cheating on their spouses. But maybe I just missed that one.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's something that we struggle with, because if you want to maintain a certain moral value of, I don't know, we should support things that do happy things, and you find out that one of these things doesn't do such happy things, you're like, like Nintendo and Foxconn. When I started hearing the rumors about Foxconn and how they beat their employees every single day with a rusty rod, I was like, yeah, but I really like playing Wii games. And when I found out that they manufacture all 3 consoles and they manufacture iPhones, a bunch of other stuff, I was like, yeah, but I really like the map function on my iPhone. I used to have to print up maps from out of my printer to go anywhere because I don't know if you guys know anything about this, but as an achromat, I'm very light sensitive, and when it's dark out, I see better. But when you're on the bus, the lights are on in the bus.
Okay.
And so you can't see a fucking thing outside. So what I used to have to do was kind of guess what street I was coming to because I couldn't see the damn street sign. And there's a social thing where I don't really like asking the bus driver repeatedly what street we're at because they don't like being asked the same thing repeatedly. And so 10 years ago, I had to print maps, a local map, a wider map, and I had to constantly check where I was. And it's kind of an exhausting process. And I get that, it's kind of a first world problem too, but still, it was annoying. So when the map thing comes out and I just look at my phone, oh my God, no more maps, no more asking, no more not knowing, no more missing my stop unless I happen to not look down. And then when I find out about Foxconn, I'm like, fuck.
Yeah.
There's probably some poor Chinese family who are like, fuck you, Americans. But I was like, I really like that function. I really like to have my whole music library of the last 10 years on one device. And I really like being able to check Safari and go and read, and so you know what? I've made a moral compromise. And the thing that kind of scares me is I'm perfectly okay with it. I can sleep just fine at night. So I guess I'm a flawed human.
Yeah, well, that's, you try. A person has to try to be honest and live by their own standards that they set. But in the world, in the end, you're one human being. You have your limits, and you're living in the environment you're in. Unless you're gonna throw on, like Gandhi did, throw on the sacks instead of buying clothes in stores and basically live wandering in the wilderness. There's going to be things you end up purchasing, buying, supporting that are going in places that are not good.
Yeah, well, and the same extends to a bunch of other stuff. It's like, I think part of my problem and why I'm sensitive to people like Myers, not to bring him up again, is in my household I was raised with certain things. Like a great example is in the 80s, Coke did business in South Africa, and so they were complicit to apartheid, and my family didn't drink Coke for years. And then one day, when I was 13 or 14 or something, I saw my mom with a Coke, and my parents had very strongly said about that issue and about other issues, this is bad. We don't do this. And I was like, fine, okay, that makes sense. So when I started with the Coke, I wasn't angry, but it was just like, wait a minute, I thought the Coke was bad because they supported, when did that change? I don't remember seeing the headline. And I said something about it, and she got really defensive. She's like, I was thirsty, okay? And it was like, oh, I get it. Okay, so it's really, 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 really important until it's not.
What I say to my kids when something like that happens is just because I'm a hypocrite doesn't mean I'm wrong.
Oh yeah, that's true too.
Do as I say.
Not as I do.
No, it's something that I often struggle with, and I've had to be told by loved ones or me all the time, let it go, Anton, let it go, and I'm like, but oh, okay, I guess I better let it go.
This is actually why when I was coming out of Christianity, I used to not swear much, right? Except when I was angry or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when I started coming out of Christianity, I still kept that habit for a long time. And then decided just one night when I was out at a dance club with some friends that I would start swearing.
Oh, that was so weird.
Except around kids. But just because I thought it was kind of an arbitrary thing that was chosen. That I was told this was wrong. But it's kind of, I don't know, it felt dishonest to keep speaking in a way that I was controlling. I was controlling it in a way that wasn't natural socially.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but I think there's a lot of things that are arbitrarily decided, which is one of the reasons I'm interested in sociology, is I think a lot of things. Like my wife and I had this discussion the other day where we were. Oh, I don't know if you guys remember the whole Paula Deen thing in the United States going down.
Yep.
And I said, you know what's interesting to me is, same with Gibson too. Like Gibson said and did some pretty nasty things. No one gave a shit until he dropped the J-bomb. Like no one gave a fuck about it. And what I don't get is, why is it acceptable to some degree to beat your wife, but it's absolutely unacceptable to use a slur against the Jewish people? And I'm not saying that it should be acceptable to use that slur, but I don't understand why the one is kind of given a pass, and the other one it's like your career ends.
I think it would necessarily be because one is secondhand information being handed out to the public at large, but is generally considered to be a personal relationship problem, yet the other one is projected out to an entire portion of the population.
Well, but I get that, but the problem I have with the two actions is that one absolutely directly and negatively affects someone. Like beating someone can go as far as killing that person. Saying a J-bomb, the maximum thing it can do to someone is offend them.
I think it has to do with social awareness. Whichever one is on the higher part of the scale at the current time is the one society is going to jump on and go, oh my God, you're a demon. And the other one is not as high, so they're going to go, well, we're going to look the other way because that's really depressing to hear.
Plus, we really like your movies.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's where we go. Is it's like I'm going to jump on this because it's easy and because there's a group dynamic going on. I'm not going to jump on this one because I don't want to. I don't feel like it. And that's why I always get annoyed with people who express moral absolutes, because it's like, okay, rape jokes are bad right up until the point where Myers says one. And if you watch the video, it's pretty clear that he wasn't really thinking about it ahead of time. It was just sort of an offhanded comment. And then immediately when the words leave his mouth, like everyone's like, oh shit, you just did the thing that we all just said is terrible and is unforgivable. But and I'm a student of the social contract for that reason mainly, because then you see that they're all like, wait a minute, can we approve of this or not? And we have to decide right now.
Yeah, I noticed that too. And
they kind of start to approve, and then they kind of realize they're not supposed to, so they kind of swing the other way. And it's really interesting because I don't know if you guys have seen any, I don't know if it's Vsauce or CGB Grey. Someone did a video on laughter and how it tends to be a social, lubricant. And I've noticed this my whole life, where like if one person starts laughing, it tends to catch on, but sometimes it doesn't. And then that one person feels kind of foolish. And it's really interesting how that works. And I noticed that in that video. It's like, okay, so he starts to chuckle, which is completely natural. You can tell it's relaxed. And then what's her name? Jade Hawk, I think. She kind of has a restrained one. And then the guy, I don't remember his name, he's with a girl in the frame. He laughs naturally. So he finds it funny. She's restrained, and I may be making this up, but I think she actually looks at him like, you're doing something wrong. You need to stop doing that. But he doesn't see her doing that, so he doesn't get the signal. And I think had he seen that, he would have like kind of restrained a little bit to make it look like he was naturally declining, but not like he'd been caught doing something wrong. And maybe I'm reading way too much into this, but I had to watch it a bunch of times.
I don't think so. Like a literal example of something similar to that happened to me this week. I was in my psychology class, and the teacher was going over the structures of the brain, like the dendrites, axons, neurons.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
And we were going over the hippocampus, and then we got to, I think it was the thalamus. And she asked if anyone knew what the thalamus controlled. And we were supposed to do the chapter reading. And it was this awkward silence because like a lot of the kids in my class are fresh out of high school. So nobody knew what the thalamus was. So there was this long, constant silence. And I felt really bad for the teacher because I knew the answer, but I had already raised my hand like a bunch of times that day. So I didn't want to continue to be the brown noser. So then just to break the silence, I said, there's something wrong with your medulla oblongata. And then the guy behind me goes, you're wrong, Colonel Sanders. And the whole class just busts out laughing, right? But there was this couple of girls at the front who just stared at us like we had just done the most terrible thing socially that day. And it didn't matter. It was like a majority of us thought it was funny.
Yeah. No, I could totally see that. Well, it's interesting you cite that because there was a time at my wife's birthday a couple of years ago where I don't know if you guys know who this is, but there's a movie star of yore named James Mason who was in Lolita and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and he has a very distinct voice, and I do a decent impression of it. And at this party, I did it, and everyone looks at me like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like it's a British guy. What's the big deal? And I think my friend even asked me to do it, and I started explaining 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Anyone? Hello? Is this on? Lolita. And I did a line from Lolita and I was like, and my wife kind of gives me this pat, like it's okay. It's
Whenever I do a joke that my friends or a social group I'm with don't get, I go, well, it would have been funnier if the audience wasn't retarded.
Hey everybody, this is Anton A Hill, aka the Atheist Asshole, and this is Evolution Misconceptions Debunked. I have a confession to make. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. In fact, I'm not a biologist of any kind. I know, shocker, isn't it? I am, however, a linguist, and in case you didn't know, linguistics is a study of languages and their structure and how they change over time, or evolve. I'm going to discuss some common misconceptions about evolution and explain them as I wrapped my mind around them through a linguistic model. Now, before you run off and go, gotcha, haha, yeah, it's just a theory, consider the difference between theory in terms of layman's conversational English and scientific theories.
Wait. Pull what out? The dart, man. Got a fucking dart in your neck. You're crazy, man. You're crazy. I like you. But you're crazy.
And then I just move on.
I got in trouble.
Sorry,
I got in trouble for that. I've had talk about revising language. I put on Facebook years ago. I said something about my wife and I got on this bus, and it was very packed, and I moved next to this guy who had a seat open, and I didn't move to get into the seat. I was just walking past him, and he looks at me and he says, "I ain't sitting next to no dude," and I kind of thought, that's weird. Do you ever ride a public bus? Because you often don't have any choice in this matter. Like, what are you going to refuse if you're in a classroom or in a meeting at your bit? Like, how far does this extend, buddy? And so I wrote on Facebook something like, "Oh, most retarded comment of the day," and I quoted it. And then one of my friends said, "Oh, funny that you make you use a pejorative term in order to describe a pejorative term." And I was like, "Oh." And my wife and I later had a conversation about it, and she was like, I basically, like, you probably should stop using that term. And I was like, and I made the linguistic argument because I'm a linguist. I was like, look, it's only pejorative because we've said it's pejorative. There's nothing inherent. It means slow down. Like, that's all it means. And
well, like earlier when you were saying this whole movement in the 80s where nobody could be wrong, that was really the beginning of the PC movement where your language had to be completely dumbed down and softened to a point where nobody could be offended by anything you say. And me, I am against that. So I will use pejorative terms all the time.
I have mixed feelings on it because I understand that some terms are truly hurtful to people. And I understand that some terms are not. And for me personally, like, my mom started doing this in like 10 years ago, and I've seen other people do it, including one of my one of my Twitter followers, I don't remember who, where they say differently abled, and I fucking hate differently abled because it's not really true, and it's condescending, and it's sort of like, I respect your group so much, I'm not going to call it a disability. It's like, well, fuck you. Like, it is. I mean, yesterday I bumped into something because I didn't see it. That's not a differently abled way of walking. It is, I bumped into something because I didn't see it, and it hurt a little bit. Like, let's call it what it is, Now,
well, exactly. But here's the thing. Since you study language, maybe you can clarify for me. I understand that over years and decades and centuries, that the meaning of a word can change completely from what it was originally meant to a more modern terminology. So, I have a few examples, but most of them I really don't want to say in a podcast because I'll probably piss somebody off. But you know, I was talking to a friend about it because I used the word retard, and he works with disabled people, and he's like, you can't say that, you know, it's disabled or differently abled or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, I mean it when I'm using it in just common conversation. Like, if I say that person was being retarded, I mean they're being stupid. Could I have used being stupid? Yes, probably. But I said, if I start hijacking the word Timmy, you know, like the character from South Park, and I just say, "Oh, you were being Timmy," you know, does that mean that I can no longer use the word Timmy in a conversation because it could offend somebody?
Yeah, it's all about context.
Yeah, where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line for the words we can use and not use?
Well, okay, the short answer to your question is that you can't draw the line, but a line will be drawn because the culture will decide.
Yeah.
And because the culture decides, there's no quantifiable date or time or implication or connotation that you can possibly predict. So your friend is right in as much as with some words that will just happen. And you can't predict which ones they are, and so it's stupid to try. The other side of that, of course, is because you can't predict it, you might as well not worry about it. Like a good example of that, what was I looked up on the Down site for Down syndrome to see what they want to call themselves, and I think they said intellectual. Oh fuck! Now I can't remember. I have it on my site somewhere. They said like cognitively delayed, I think, or disabled or something. So I figure like that's sort of where I go is what is the term that is acceptable to the community to whom it applies. I will try to use that one. Now I have mixed feelings on this stuff, as I just said. There are certain terms I refuse to use publicly because I have observed that there is a community who considers them bad, like the N word, the FAGG word, and I recognize that I'm drawing a line and that it is arbitrary.
There's the context, like you say. I would say two good examples for me. What you're talking about is I don't use the N word. I just call it the N word because even though it's changed context, and I think in some circles, white and black friends might throw it back and forth. I don't even want to get into that because I don't want to go there. That's a line I draw for myself. Word. You were talking about the amazing atheist. He had a video a couple months ago, if that long, where he attacks anyone who doesn't like to use the word faggot. And it was really harsh. I mean, I was watching it from the point of view of somebody who is in the gay community and watching this. But, you know, he's smiling and yelling it over and over again. And at the very end, he ends off with the line, and if you don't like the fact that I'm using the word faggot, it's because you're a faggot. And I was like, you know what? I think that's a line that can be drawn by the gay community. Whether I'm not going to draw that line, but I'm pretty sure they would draw the line with the way he's throwing it around.
Well, I think if you're willing to... Sorry, go ahead.
I've heard the same argument from people within the black community and I don't have any problem with this. I don't know why white people do. Like when I've heard black people say, well, we can say because we're in the community, I'm like, yeah, I'm with that. I agree. Like you have an experience that I can't have. I will never know what it's like. So if you want to use it casually, and even if you don't want to justify that use by so-called reclaiming it, I'm fine. Like I understand that there's a very specific and very profound cultural difference between your point of view and my point of view, and I don't even want the right to say that word because I know some of the history and I know that I can't know it. I can't empathize fully. I have known friends, gay friends, who don't have a huge problem with the double G F word, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like, for me, there have been people who were killed because of who they chose to love, or not chose, just who they loved, and I don't know. I don't feel good about it. But then I have less of a problem with other people using it, except I think it depends on context and intention, and I would probably find TJ's video on that kind of irritating, at least.
See, for me, I break my use of language down into categories. I have my how do I do this? I have my social professional language, which is the language I generally use in the context of being out, shopping or at job or at school. Then I have my interpersonal language, the language I use with friends and family.
Right.
And then I have my, there was another category I had, but I forgot. It was like my
angry
language, I guess.
Yeah.
The inappropriate
Where
language
all the
that I
rules
use.
come off.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think that, selecting words is always, that's why I asked you, because you said you were a student of language.
Yeah.
I've always found why people become offended by a particular use of a word very interesting. That's all.
Well, I think probably the biggest reason for it is that there's usually some known attached connotation, event, history, whatever, which is specific to that word in that context. And if someone is seen as abusing that somehow, be it trivializing it or be it using it to attack, I think that's the basis of the offense. And I understand that. Now, the difficulty comes with what you said is what happens when that sphere expands to include otherwise normally used words. And unfortunately, I think it just has to be a case-by-case basis where the culture just kind of has to figure it out as it goes along. And that's actually why I really don't like what happened to the word special, because now it's kind of meaningless. Because
everyone's special, or
everyone's special, everyone's talented, and specifically, if we use special as a euphemism for retarded, what that means is that, honestly, when someone says that is special, I kind of don't know whether they're being sarcastic or not, because they could be using it as a euphemism for retarded, or they could be saying that they sincerely think it's a special thing. Yeah. And obviously, this doesn't come up that much. It's probably not going to, but I have caught myself wondering, what do they mean? And in my opinion, that's the worst possible thing can happen, is because language is obviously supposed to be efficient. Like that's the optimal mode of it. And if that efficiency decreases for a not very good reason, then I would say we need to get rid of the reason. But who knows? Maybe there's a parent out there who has children who are developmentally delayed and would completely disagree with me and say, you know what, they are special, and fuck you for saying otherwise. And I would have to say, I don't know what your experience is like, so sorry.
Anton, I'm guessing that you consider yourself a skeptic, right?
Although I say that pausing just because I think I've been guilty of being non-skeptical about some things before. But yeah, generally.
Well, I've never been unskeptical about anything in my life. Well, that's one of the things I noticed, like I say, watching your videos, reading what you have to write, listening to a couple of your interviews. That's what I picked up on. You have your own points of view. You take the time to lay them out. And when someone challenges you, you reconsider. You allow dissenting points of view without taking it so bitterly personal. Well, maybe you do it first.
Well, I'm human, and I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, it's because I have been wrong so many times, and I've seen people be wrong so many times. And just in my own deconversion, I mean, I actually had a softball one, because I don't know about you guys, but I came from a very left-leaning church, and it didn't preach hell. It didn't preach the divinity of Christ. It didn't preach sin. It didn't do any of that stuff. So I actually loved it. I thought it was a really fun church. But what got me was claims were being made, and I wasn't even so into Sagan. I don't know who he was at that point, but I just kept seeing people like my parents were saying things as fact, which didn't seem to be fact. And one of the things that I noticed was when I asked, just where did we get this from? Like, how do we know this? I was often rebuffed with, you're being cynical. And I was like, no, I'm just asking, like, how do we know that the crystal heals you if you rub it on the skin? Like, I think it's pretty good question. Should this be replacing modern medical science? Because if so, hey, let's go dig up a bunch of crystals and just rub them on each other. And that's when I really started to kind of fall out. It was like, this is weird. Like there are categories of things which I am not being told I can't question, but I effectively can't question, and I wonder why that is. Because this is coming from a family that is saying I should question things, and now there's this special category of things I'm not supposed to. And when I hit that dichotomy of there is stuff that you should believe because it feels good, and science is important, I couldn't resolve it for myself. Because, and in fact, I remember hearing, I don't know if you guys have heard this term or this expression, but I heard that the Bible was the inspired word of God, and I thought what it meant was men were so I don't know if you guys have ever been to a major cathedral like Notre Dame or something, but even as an atheist going into one of those, I'm like, the amount of devotion and praise and adoration that had to go into this, I can't fathom. I don't understand how humans can feel something is important enough to build something like this over at least a century. Like to be born, live and die knowing that this project will not be finished.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a good deal of money involved in that too, and a church. But still, the initial sentiment that I feel when I go into one of those places where I'm like, wow, I can't even finish a fucking video game, and this was over several lifetimes. That I kind of get, and I kind of admire, because that is a sense of, I guess I said it, adoration that I don't really ever have. And when I heard the word is inspired, what it meant was just that feeling that someone felt so connected to God, whether they were or not, that they felt the need to put these words down. And I thought that was kind of cool. Like, it just, inspiration, just what great authors get.
Like God being a muse.
Well, not even just the idea of God being a muse. But then when I got into trouble was I thought, oh, wait a minute. Some people, what they're saying this means is that God actually put the words into this person's head. And that's when I got lost, because I was like, well, but some of them are pretty stupid.
Or contradictory.
So the inspiration part I kind of got and I kind of liked. But then the other part I was like, well, that doesn't make... So that's the thing is, I didn't... This is what I tell people all the time. I didn't mean to become an atheist. I didn't even want to. I liked what I was experiencing, and I didn't mean to become skeptical. I didn't mean for any of that to happen. It's just things were being presented to me as fact, and the value of evaluating facts was being presented to me as important. And so when I applied the one to the other, it didn't always match up, and yet everyone around me didn't seem to mind. And it was like, excuse me, you guys, why don't we give us a try? How about I break someone's leg and rub a crystal on it and see how quickly it heals? No one was.
Is it a big crystal?
For that. Huh?
Is it a big crystal?
Yeah, exactly. No. That's a perfectly good question. Like, I remember thinking, like, does the kind of crystal matter? Does the length of the crystal matter? Does how it was worked into a shape matter?
This sounds like Reiki a bit, doesn't it?
I didn't Reiki at the time, but yeah, it's very much the same thing. And so when I left the church, I remember telling my mom, who was disappointed at the time, I was like, I don't understand how this can be, and no one seems to know how it can be. No one even is trying to explain it or to give a reason or to give evidence. So my question is, why should I believe it? And she and my dad and other people just didn't have an answer for me. I was like, well, if that's the extent of it, then no. I mean, why? Like, I can spend my time doing other things that make more. And what's funny to me is, in that era of my life, I wasn't even a so-called militant atheist yet. Like, that took a couple more years. I didn't even give a shit about church and state separation. I just did.
I didn't say anything to anyone for years after I stopped believing.
Yeah.
I just didn't talk about it.
I was pretty vocal. Honestly, I went straight from, like I never really had a heavily believing family. Like, we already went over this in our first episode.
Yeah, I'm from fundamentalist background, and he's from more of a easygoing church
kind
background.
of really super relaxed. I think I was to church a handful of times in my life, so it was never really forced down my throat. But but right after my sister passed away, I became really anti-God. Because I was angry. I was angry my sister died, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, she's in a better place," blah blah blah, and I'm like, "Fuck you," So screw God.
No, I completely understand that. I've been through a number of those kinds of things myself. Like, I wrote about this recently. My godmother died a couple months ago, and he'd been married to her for like 30 years. And I mean, I really can't imagine a greater life difference, except if one loses one's child. And I know someone who went through that as well. And I just, when I hear, because my godfather and I talked about this, and he said, people said, oh, you can't mope around all day. And I was like, but I want to mope around. She was the person I most loved in my life. And I was like, you know what, Patrick, if you want to mope around, you fucking mope around. Because they don't know what they're talking about. And I told him, I think what's really going on there is they are uncomfortable with the idea of death, because we all are. Yeah. And that they're basically telling you, I'm not comfortable with this, and I can't tell you I'm not comfortable with that because it's not polite. But I will tell you something that is socially acceptable as sort of a nice thing to say so that we can maintain a relationship, and then I'm going to go over here and do something else.
Hey everybody, this is Anton A Hill, aka the Atheist Asshole, and this is Near-Death Experiences Are Bullshit. So the particulars obviously are up for discussion, but it seems like the most common features are the tunnel, the loved one, a feeling of bliss and serenity. One of the things that I have heard from people is that one of the reasons that near-death experiences are valid, or the idea of them is valid, is that they're so common, or the reports of them are so common. Immediately what leaps to my mind is, well, so are alien abduction stories, and yet most people who believe in near-death experiences, or the validity of them, don't also believe in the validity of alien abductions.
Yeah, I stabbed a man in the heart. I saw that. Brick killed a guy. Did you throw a trident? Yeah, there were horses and a man on fire, and I killed a guy with a trident.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
I'm sure you probably experienced that with bereavement over your sister. The whole better place thing, it's like, well, first of all, you don't know that. Second of all, you don't know she's going to end up there.
Yeah.
And, it's just, don't impose your bullshit on me, because you would not want me to do the same thing to you.
Yeah. Well, because of the way I was able to get over that situation, just as an example, is part of the reason why I'm taking this foundational course. And eventually I would like to take an additive crisis counseling, bereavement, and suicide counseling course to add on to what I already have.
Yeah.
But to go back to the skeptic and critical thinking, we've talked a lot about this. Critical thinking is something that is sorely lacking in just day-to-day life. I mean, I know a person who believes that they are a psychic medium. I call him the ghost whisperer. And the other day, a couple of girls got the two of us together to actually talk. And I asked him, I says, do you believe that you have proof that you talk to ghosts? And he goes, no. You have to believe it. And I said, so, do you see the ghosts, or do they just talk to you in words? And he goes, no, I get impressions and feelings.
Right.
And I said, okay, so can I ask you a question? He goes, sure, anything. And I said, how do you, as an individual taking the same course as I am, which are about critical thinking and psychoanalyzation and therapeutic methods, separate or make a distinction in your own mind between what you believe are impressions you're getting from spirits from beyond and subjective impressions created by your own imagination? And he sat there and he gave me this blank stare, and then he goes, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you. And I'm hoping that he'll apply some real critical thinking if he has the basis for using that skill. And then maybe go, wow, I've been making shit up for a decade.
Yeah. This part, I'm not an expert in the brain, but one of my fascinations is the brain. I listen to a podcast called Brain Science Podcast.
Cool.
You ever heard of that?
No, I haven't. It just sounds neat.
Oh, yeah, it's great. She's a neuroscientist, I believe. Anyways, it's a great show. Different guest every episode, different specialization. And the brain, basically, one of the things I've learned about it is that whatever your environment, whatever you're doing in your environment over the years, whatever the demands are, your brain is plastic and will develop those areas to be proficient.
Right.
So if you never learn to be critical about certain things, you have the potential, but it's just never, it's like a muscle that's never been worked out.
Yeah. I shit you not, I am literally writing one of my assignments on neuroplasticity right now.
Oh, yeah.
And essentially it's a lot like the idea that because your brain is plastic, the ability for it to create more synaptic connections with other synapses and dendrites and axons, like basically the brain cells can form more connections with previously underused brain cells nearby, so it can get around and bypass damage, or it can increase the density of synaptic connections, which makes it so that basically your brain has more options to operate at a higher efficiency. That's a really, really oversimplified view of it, but it's really, really interesting stuff. They have been doing experiments on all age ranges and memory plasticity. It has a number of terms that can be used for it. It's awesome stuff.
I find the potential very positive Finding out things like that. Yeah, it's just amazing. It's like, okay, so you took a wrong turn or something went wrong when you were growing up, but you know what? Doesn't mean you can't make adjustments. You can't work
the experiment they did in London, England, using neuroplasticity is they found that London cab drivers that had to remember several hundred complex city streets and routes had an increased density in hippocampus, which is responsible for spatial memory. Here's a funny thing. There was another study.
But it decreased their politeness.
It decreased their politeness. There was another study done, and I'll have to look up the name, so don't quote me on it, but I remember reading about this, where a high level of religiosity causes an atrophy of the hippocampus.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was, I didn't know if the two were, it's just, you're doing brain damage.
I should become religious to find out. We'll run an experiment.
No doubt.
Yeah, and unfortunately all that stuff is considered socially sacred, so I don't think that, at least in this country, I don't know that much about Canada in those regards, but I know that, I just saw this when I was going to get on with you guys. I saw this piece on YouTube with Anderson Cooper interviewing this woman who she was going. It was the church where the guy said like, "Oh, we should round up gays and put them in electrified fences." And Cooper was just asking very straightforward questions like, "Do you believe this? Do you think this is what we should do?" And it was really interesting to me because she kept kind of doing this weird thing where she was both being defensive and also it seemed like she kind of got that what they had said publicly was not really the best thing to say.
That's not the Phelps family, is it?
No. It was a different church. And she I could tell she kind of broke down at some point where the struggle between the defensiveness and the, oh, this wasn't so cool, the defensiveness won, and she just kind of blah, like, well, just fuck you. And I thought that was interesting because I was like, okay, so clearly she is aware that this probably wasn't such a cool thing to say, but she can't say that because that would mean she'd go against what was said. But she is having the struggle, and it's interesting because the cognitive dissonance involved there is like because when he's just asking calm questions, it's not about attacking her, and so she can't say that. She can't say, oh, you're just attacking me. So. And that's why I like doing those calm sort of conversations, and that's why asking people like, "Oh, why do you think that?" or "How do you arrive at that conclusion?" Because then they're forced to say, "Yeah, this is what I think," and usually they're like, it's like you guys said, they have to then justify it. And unfortunately, guys, on that note, I think I need to go because the lady has been very patiently waiting for me.
Well, listen, Chris has got to go too. So
yeah, actually, it's perfect timing, man. Awesome.
And I'm gonna go to sleep because I was up late. So.
Oh, okay.
It was a very awesome conversation.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
We want to do it again.
Yeah,
I'll do this again.
You can keep in contact with us and let us know what you're up to. I'll follow your stuff. Thanks for taking the time, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you guys too, and you take care, and thanks so much for checking me out because I frankly thought nobody was. So it's kind of cool. It's neat to know that someone has cared a little bit.
Well, we do, and you're awesome to speak to, man. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, you guys have a good one.
That's it. Anton Hill, excellent guest. My apostates, you should definitely check out this free thinker. atheistasshole.com. Anton Hill as the user for YouTube, and twitter.com, Anton Hill. You can check out all the links in the show notes, and check out his vlog. Excellent guest, lots of fun.
Topic is who is sick and who is not, and if you follow the papers, you know that pretty soon everybody's going to be sick. That the rates of mental illness are climbing at what seem to be alarming proportions. There are different theories for this epidemic. One theory that's partly true is that we're more alive to mental illness than we were before. So this is a good part of the epidemic. It accounts for some of the rising rates we'll talk about, but only a small portion of those increases. Second theory, we're living in especially trying times. I have absolutely no sympathy for this theory. It seems to me that, if anything, this is a very privileged time to live. I'd much prefer to be here now than during the Great War, during the Great Depression, during the Black Plague, during the Spanish Inquisition, during the times of turmoil in Rome. I think we have our problems, but I wouldn't trade our problems for the problems of the average person living at any other point in history. Some people would say it's vaccination or environmental toxins. The vaccination theory has turned out to be completely false, in fact, fraudulent. Environmental toxins are impossible to rule out, but also impossible to rule in. The only toxin that makes real sense, and probably does have a large role, would be alcohol and substances of abuse, but there's no indication that they've gone up in the same time period as the sudden increase in rates of psychiatric disorder over the last 20 or so years. I don't think that human nature changes quickly. I don't think there's more psychopathology in the world now than there was 20 or 30 or 50 or 100,000 years ago. I think labels change very quickly, and that's one of the things I know about, partly because I'm responsible for some of these changes, and in some cases not too proud of the results that accrued. It's very easy to change the definition of a mental disorder by just tweaking it the tiniest little bit, and all of a sudden you'll have millions of new patients.
I don't think I want to know a 6-year-old who isn't a dreamer or a silly heart. And I sure don't want to know one who takes their student career seriously. I don't have a college degree, but I know a good kid when I see one. Because they're all good kids, until dried-out, brain-dead skags like you drag them down and convince them they're no good. You so much as scowl at my niece or any other kid in this school, and I hear about it, and I'm coming looking for you. Take this quarter. Go downtown and have a rat gnaw that thing off your face.
We need to stop drugging all of our kids. Let them be different.
This one's for all the ADHD, mildly autistic, attention deficit, can't sit still, kids that are considered too hyper and unable to learn. There's a lot of people that grew up that way. This scene reminds me of what you have to go through.
You know, everything is not an anecdote. You have to discriminate. You choose things that are funny or mildly amusing or interesting. You're a miracle. Your stories have none of that. They're not even amusing accidentally. Honey, I'd like you to meet Del Griffith. He's got some amusing anecdotes for you. Oh, and here's a gun so you can blow your brains out. You'll thank me for it. I could tolerate any insurance seminar. For days, I could sit there and listen to them go on and on with a big smile on my face. They'd say, how can you stand it? And I'd say, because I've been with Del Griffith. I can take anything. And you know what they'd say? They'd say, I know what you mean. The shower curtain ring guy. Whoa. It's like going on a date with a chatty Cathy doll. I expect you to have a little string on your chest, you know, that I pull out and have to snap back. Except I wouldn't pull it out and snap it back. You would. And by the way, you know, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
You want to hurt me? Go right ahead if it makes you feel any better. I'm an easy target. Yeah, you're right. I talk too much. I also listen too much. I could be a cold-hearted cynic like you. But I don't like to hurt people's feelings. Well, you think what you want about me. I'm not changing. I like me. My wife likes me. My customers like me. Because I'm the real article. What you see is what you get.